Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Inga Cotton. I'm the founder and executive director of San Antonio Charter Moms. And on Charter Moms Chats, we go live to help families get the information they need to get a great education for their kids. And sometimes we focus on the San Antonio school landscape, but we also talk about different types of education. And today the focus is on classical education. And I'm really grateful to have as our guest Oscar Ortiz, and he's the CEO and superintendent of Heritage Classical Academy, which is a proposed charter school for the Houston area. He Oscar lives here in San Antonio, and I've known him in various roles, like from teaching to leadership, and he's really blossoming as a thought leader and influencer in classical education. He's got great resources to help parents understand what is classical education, and that's the topic of the guest post that he wrote that we shared today on sachartermoms.com, and you'll find it on our social media channels at sachartermoms. Oscar, I'm really excited to talk to you more about this beautiful guest post, sharing these great ideas about classical education.
Thank you so much, Inga. It's such an honor to be here and a pleasure to be talking with you again. I really enjoy it every time we get a chance to. I think it's my second time doing a live with you, so I'm always looking forward to an opportunity to talk some more. I love talking about classical education, so you're really giving me a space to just do what I love. So thank you so much.
Well, and you're a great writer, so I'm really proud to have that
Thank
content
you.
on our site. Okay, so one of the in the beginning of your essay, you say you love it when parents ask you, "What is classical education?" So why do you love that question so much?
Well, I think it gives me an opportunity to talk about something. It gives us an opportunity to talk about something that isn't discussed as much as it should be. Let me just give you an example. A child is at school anywhere near 8 to 10 hours a day, depending on whether they have tutoring in the morning, extracurricular courses in the afternoon after school, or more tutoring. It all depends. So 10 hours a day, Monday through Friday, that is a lot of time. During that time, a child is being exposed to all types of ideas, books, pictures, behaviors, sometimes behavior patterns from their teachers as well as their classmates. And all those things go towards shaping and informing our children. So that's why I think it should be really at the forefront of everything that we're discussing as parents, and really asking ourselves, what kind of education is my child receiving, and is it the right one?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's another point you make in the article that I thought was very well placed, is that sometimes parents can be almost too trusting in like school systems, and just sort of assuming that what's happening during that 8 to 10 hours is what parents want to be happening for their kids. Um, so, do you have any advice for parents on, what questioning their assumptions about what's happening on campus during the school day?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the article, part of the trust is actually, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't come from negligence. It comes really from, and I'm speaking here as someone coming into the country, right? So I'm from a different country, so I'm going to talk as a foreigner. When I'm looking at American education, and I've been studying it for 10 years now, what I've noticed is that in America, Americans have a trust of their democratic institutions, and the trust is in others, that they also have and share the same love for the freedoms and the rights that we have secured for ourselves. And I think that for a long time in America, parents have felt a trust towards their schools and their teachers, that their children are receiving the type of education that will either continue to secure and maintain those liberties, and really create a society where we can be, which is just, and we can be happy and pursue the things that make us happy. Now, over the course of the last several decades, I think all of us can agree that we have seen a decline in that trust. And just recently, if you look at the news and what's happening in the last couple of weeks, perhaps months, ever since COVID, the decline has become, or the erosion of that trust has become so noticeable, that it's with a heavy heart, as someone who is a school leader, it's with a heavy heart that I see how parents and teachers and school leaders are now talking to each other and about each other in a way that's contributing more to the divisions and the lack of trust. And why is this so detrimental? to education, especially if you're thinking of the child in particular. It's because you can't educate a child if there isn't trust between the parent and the teacher. It's impossible. There's always going to, a child is going to be at the dinner table, and they're going to hear their mom or dad say some ugly things about the teacher, and they're going to take that and they're going to absorb it. And then their attitude in the classroom will be one of, I don't need to respect this person. I don't need to listen to this person. Mom and dad think that they're not teaching me anything, and vice versa. So how do we get out of this problem? Now, this is a crisis of such proportion that it's really going to, I mean, it's a good question. It's a valid question to ask ourselves and start thinking about how do we work again to fixing the situation, and creating an environment for our students and our families where we can be happy and see our children succeed academically as well as character-wise.
Yeah. Well, I
Mhm.
think one of the things I really appreciate about your post is that you have these like short lists that you can wrap your head around of like questions or prompts. And so like one of
Mhm.
the things you describe is like, questions that parents can ask, and this is part of rebuilding that trust, right? It's like
Mhm.
so the parents like, like don't just assume that you know what's going on, but don't be adversarial, but
Mhm.
just come armed with good questions and an open mind. I've got them written down here. Do you want me to read them out, or do you like do it and then you
I
can
got them.
comment?
I remember
You
these.
got it? Okay, good. Okay.
Yes.
All right. But yeah,
Uh,
but I think this is, this is what we do as teacher moms. Like we're trying to help parents. So we're going to arm them with questions. So anyway, if y'all are just listening, you don't have to write these down. Just go to the blog post. They're in a
yeah.
bullet list. But I thought these were really good questions.
Yes, there are a set of questions that I recommend our parents always ask themselves about the school that they are dropping off their children at, whether it's a private school, it's a public school, a charter, a magnet school. Always ask yourself at least 3 questions, because these questions are designed to actually tell apart what I call the wheat from the chaff, right? Which is number one, is this the kind of education, or first of all, what kind of education is my child receiving? Number two, following up with that one, is this the kind of education that is oriented towards the happiness of my child? Now, happiness itself is such a broad term, and there's a lot of people who disagree on what makes someone happy. But I know from working with parents for 10 years that at least we can agree on that it's not always necessarily material wealth. It's not fame. It's not all these things that are passing and transitory. From a classical perspective, what makes a child happy or human happy is character and virtue, right? Is have I developed into a good person with integrity, who's willing to stand up for what is good and just, even in the face of persecution sometimes. So it's a much more robust understanding of happiness in the classical world, and I think that I want to. When I talk about classical, I always want to invite our parents to explore that with me, because right now the prevailing attitude, at least in our culture, excuse me, the music that our children listen to, the art that they love, or the influencers that they follow, excuse me, the prevailing idea of happiness is fame, the number of followers you have. Am I the right weight? Do I have the right nose size or eye color? Or do I look a certain way? And those are things that ultimately are going to hurt our children and lead them into a life that's not going to be fulfilling in the end. So that's the second question that I tell parents that they should ask themselves: is the school have an understanding, or is it oriented towards true happiness for my children? And the third and last one is, are the methods that they use time tested, right? Are they true and time tested? A lot of our parents don't realize, and again, this is because it's the field of education has become so specialized that really, to really wrap your mind around it, you need to get a degree almost. You need to spend 4 to 8 years trying to understand what has happened over the last 100 years in America in regards to education. But again, a lot of our parents don't realize that there are so many educational models out there today, so many educational theories and philosophies, and our teachers in particular, coming from different schools of thought, different colleges, teacher colleges, different alternative certification programs. they're coming with all these other forms of thinking about the child and the world and what learning really is all about, that as I point out in the article, you can have a child, you can have twins in the same grade, so fourth grade, for example,
Right.
and they're both receiving just radically different educations because their teachers are different, right? So once again, that's very important for parents to ask themselves those three questions. Is the school have a concise and clear and uniform way of understanding what the nature of the human person is and of the world, and what makes this child happy in the end, are all things that they should ask themselves.
Yeah, and these are such good questions because they,
Thank you.
like, they're simple, but they get to the heart of the matter, and,
Yes.
and things like right, and even, like, I think some schools they don't have an answer to the question about happiness. It's not like right. It's not that they have the classical model versus a different model. It's like well, that's not what we do. I don't know. Or like or if their idea of happiness is just let the kids do whatever they want, like
Hmm.
that doesn't we know that doesn't really work, right? And as adults, we all have to have self-control and self-regulation so that we can be responsible citizens and take care of each other. And we can't just be impulsive and selfish. But some schools don't want to take that responsibility for guiding children that way.
Absolutely. And I think it's, again, there's been a shift, a paradigm shift in the world of education over the last 80, some would argue more than 100 years ago, this shift began, which is um, we don't want to impose on children our worldviews anymore. We have really taken the idea of democracy to a whole nother level, where now we're allowing the children to determine what it is, what are values, what is worthwhile pursuing. I think to a point where it could actually be detrimental to them. And what we're seeing as a result is our children are not as equipped as they once were to really face the trials of the world that they're going to be facing as adults. And that makes them, right, that inadequacy that they're going to experience is then going to lead to bitterness. And we're seeing some really high levels of suicide and lack of meaning in the world. And it's just, it's not, we're seeing the results, and yet we're still not doing anything to change, right? Now, I don't want to say anything. I think that the school choice movement is booming right now, especially homeschool is booming right now. Classical is really just spreading like wildfire. And to see thinkers and writers, both on the political left as well as the political right, talking about there's something here with classical that can really unite and heal our country in a way that nothing else can. That's very encouraging, and I really want to encourage our viewers to continue looking into classical, and especially look at Heritage Classical Academy in Houston, Texas, where we're going to be offering families this kind of educational opportunity.
Yes, so that's my cue to put the website up on the screen,
Oh,
right? So
thank you.
yes.
Wow,
So
that's
I assume is
incredible.
there's like an interest list or where folks can, okay, good, good. Okay, and
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes, so if you go to our website, you can sign up to receive updates. We're also on YouTube, we're on Facebook, Twitter. They can look us up at Heritage Classical Academy on Twitter. They can look me up as well. And easily, on all of my social media platforms, I've attached our website to it, so they have easy access to it as well. So it'd be great
Good.
to see the interest in our viewers visiting us.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I want to go back to something you said about right that a question that families can ask about their
Mhm.
children's school, like are the methods they're using time tested and true, and
Yep.
that I, it's I think it's surprising like to parents sometimes to find out how little support teachers get sometimes with curriculum. Like sometimes the teachers are just kind of turned loose, like, oh well, go just go on and go on the internet or borrow something that another teacher made. Whereas like in classical education, there's a consensus about what is the body of knowledge to share and to make sure that the curriculum is rich with knowledge and the teachers get that support. The teachers need to focus on their classroom management and their pedagogy, they get training on that too. But the school is giving them a head start by having like rich, high quality curriculum, with good ideas, and it's going to teach them values about American society. Um, so I want to kind of I'm sharing my views about what you said about these kind of questions that parents could ask. But I want to kind of segue into like in this post, like you talk about like what are the assumptions that underlie classical education, that shape and define classical education, and how important that first assumption is. So I was wondering, can you share
Yes, yes.
what is this like fundamental assumption about classical education? How does it shape and define like what the experience is like at a classical education school?
Yes, if I could just really quickly go back to what you were mentioning about pedagogy,
Yeah.
which is very important. I was making the point, and I realized that I went off on a tangent, which is very common for me, very common for me to do. So please get me back on track. That is that it's again, it's very several of our parents don't realize that not only are these many different types of educational models, but a lot of the practices that we're seeing today in a lot of our public as well as charter schools. Not all charter schools are equal, right? Not all charter schools are great either. Um, but what we're seeing is that a lot of the pedagogical practices are no older than just the last decades. And there is this tendency in schools, and there is a temptation that we have as educators to really pick up the latest fad and to just try to implement that in the school. Well, the classical model has already tried and tested for more than 2,000 years. And you would think in 2,000 years of trial and error, we would definitely get something right. We do have some methods that have actually proven themselves to be successful across all ages, all demographics, all languages that produce great results. And to give you an example, there's currently in the South Bronx, there's a classical school called the South Bronx Classical School. I know the superintendent there. He is in one of the poorest districts, considered one of the poorest districts in the nation, and he is outperforming the best private schools of New Jersey, right? So again, he has received 2 Blue Ribbon Awards from the federal government because they're using methods that are tested and they're true. Now, this is what I've been, what I encourage all of the educators who are watching or parents who are watching. You can apply these same methods at your school. If, say, your principal is not classical and doesn't want to consider classical, you can still apply some of these methods and see the results. So that's the beauty of classical. We've learned a lot over 2,000 years of trial and error in human psychology, and now we are again, with technology and the new science coming out, a lot of our methods are being confirmed, and we're just happy to see that we were right all along. I mean, this is wonderful. Now to your next question, which was the assumptions. So it would be remiss of me to come on here and say, well, all these other educational models, they make assumptions of the human person in the world, and classical doesn't. That would be a lie. Classical education also makes its own set of assumptions. And it's very important for families to be familiar with these, because this is really what gets at the heart of what makes classical so unique and different. It's just how deep and rich the philosophy is behind everything that we do. So we're intentional about everything. And in the article, as you pointed out, the one assumption that I am claiming, and it's a big claim, and I'm sure a lot of other classical educators might want to argue with me about this. The one assumption that I'm claiming is perhaps the most popular and the most widely accepted among all classical schools is that the world is true, good, and beautiful. Or as I write it in the article, the cosmos, all of existence, all of reality. It's true, good, and beautiful. Now, Inga, there's a lot that we can unpack there that could take us days. A lot of books have been written on this subject, and a lot of blog posts, I imagine. But to summarize it for our audience, it's really it's as follows. You could summarize it as follows: we experience reality as humans. We experience reality in 3 main ways, which is beautiful, and the way we experience beauty is through the body, so what pleases us. We experience it either as good or bad for us, and the way that we experience the world as good or bad is through what philosophically we consider to be the heart, the human heart or human will. So we look at human behavior, actions of others, and we judge whether they're good or bad. And the third way in which we experience reality is through the intellect. So our reasoning intellect experiences the world as either true or false. And knowing those three ways of experiencing the world and understanding them as a teacher goes a long way to shaping a child's worldview so that they can be happy in the long term, right? Because they can then, as adults, they can look at themselves. Just to give you a quick practical example of how this happens every day in my life and in the life of children who have been classically trained. That is, they can now look at themselves and say they're having an argument with a friend, and just any argument, say an argument on the existence of God. We feel as humans in the body, we experience a reaction, right? Whether you agree or disagree if God exists or not, I can get angry at someone who disagrees with me, and there's this passion that really wants to that moves me. Knowing that I am experiencing that in the body, and that there's two other ways of really judging that experience is helpful. I can then look at it and say, that's my experience, my immediate gut experience. But now I can judge whether that's good or bad. And then I could distance myself a little bit through practice. And that's why classical education is a lifelong thing. It's not just a, one day thing. I can then judge intellectually whether what my friend is saying is true or false based on the merits of the argument as opposed to how I feel, right? Or as opposed to the character of the person speaking. So that's incredible, it's significant. Children who don't have that grounding and that shaping tend to do what a philosopher, 2,300-year-old philosopher named Protagoras said, which is, they become the measure of all things. That's what happens. So what does he mean by that? He means that we judge everything based just on the body, right? It's immediately the one thing, the main thing that we use to live in the world, to move about in the world and to experience things. The problem with the body, Inga, is that it's always thinks of itself first. Self-preservation. The first thing I think of is I need to feed myself. I need to make sure that I'm safe and healthy. But the heart and the mind are the two organs, if you will, to think of others. Sometimes the mind will suggest things that might put my body in danger, right? So when I sacrifice, or when a mother decides, when a woman decides to have a baby, for example, that's a big momentous decision that will take a toll on her body. And she made that decision and from her own free will. So those are things, again, those are the three ways in which we live in the world. And that's what we mean as classical education. It's a summarized version, right? I'm reducing it when we say the world is true, good, and beautiful. Do you have any questions about that? Because that's really, there's a lot there.
Yeah, well, I think it relates back to what you were saying about happiness. And that so this is the connection I was drawing. Is like basically like if the so you're evaluating an idea, right? A friend is trying to propose, get you on board with something, and you're evaluating it. If you only go with, kind of how your body reacts, then like man is the measure of all things. Like the problem is that quick reaction, it can be fallible, right? It can have, there's biases. And but so if we're only making that kind of quick reaction, then that's going to limit our opportunity to examine our beliefs or to make decisions that are altruistic or that are for the greater good. And that's similar, like if you define happiness in a narrow way, like as only as like sort of pleasure, initial, a quick positive response, then you're missing out on the things that make life really meaningful in the long run. And the kind of happiness you can get from caring for others, or making a sacrifice, deferring gratification. Some of the things that are most worthwhile on this earth are things that don't bring a reward right away, but it takes a lot of patient work to build towards. And that's the kind of shaping of character that a classical education school can do. And there's other schools that do it that don't necessarily call it classical education, but they have found that truth, that about thinking about the big picture, thinking about how to be a good citizen, going beyond just the initial reaction of like short-term happiness, fame, wealth, initial reactions, and and think bigger picture, think deeper.
Absolutely. And this is why This is why I encourage, and I've created a YouTube channel for this reason, which is I want to make sure that everyone realizes that these are principles that they can adopt and they can apply to their own schools. They can apply, if they're homeschools, to their own classrooms, if they're at public school. These are principles that will yield the results they're looking for and will create a much richer environment for their children. Now, I would love for all of our schools to start moving and transitioning more and more towards classical, because I do believe that this is the model that we are really severely lacking, and at this time we really need something like it. However, you're right; these are practices and principles that anyone can apply, and I want to encourage people to explore these. So check out our YouTube channel, both on Heritage Classical Academy or School Mentor. Follow us on YouTube, on Twitter. There's a lot of resources out there. Yes.
Yeah, so there are so many different accounts and handles. Like, I don't think I can put them all up on the screen, but I really want to encourage people to visit the blog post. And so it's at shchartermoms.com, and we share it on all our social media today, which is like at shchartermoms. And from there, but yeah, I mean, you're putting out a lot of great content. Like, you are a great follow on Twitter. So
Thank you again.
okay, here's I'll put the Twitter handle on the screen. Like, while I'm
Thank
talking.
you,
Let's
sir.
see. Yeah, because it's really important to have these conversations. Like, what you're talking about with school culture. That these are things that school leaders and teachers and parents can be very conscious about this, and they can move schools in a more positive direction. And
Yes.
it's not enough just to have a label of classical education. Like, you have to live it, and you have to be insightful about it. And I think that's where, like, I'm really glad that you've created these channels, like your Instagram and your YouTube, and places where you're sharing the insights that you've gained over having worked in different classical education schools, being a leader, now being like a founder of a potential school. You've got a lot of knowledge to share.
Thank you, Inga. I appreciate it. And I appreciate my team up in Houston for giving me the opportunity to be able to do this for the children of Houston. I want to encourage all of our viewers, again, to visit our website, Heritage Classical Academy, not to be confused with other Heritage Classical Academies out there. So Heritage Classical Houston, we made sure to add that there, .org. So it's very easy to, we're so used to the .com. So once again, it's .org. And you can follow us there. You can support us in many ways, and you can join our information or newsletter that we send out, that we'll be sending out as well. So there's a lot of resources for everyone. There's more to come, right? Inga, we're meeting again. I'd love to meet again and talk about part 2 of this conversation.
That's right. That's right. Can you give a little preview about part 2?
Yes, absolutely. And we can go deeper into part 1 as well. I feel like 30 minutes is not enough because there's so much to cover. And it's just what I love to do. So for part 2, we're going to be looking at 2 more assumptions. So the first assumption is the cosmos, or the way that we experience reality, is as true, good, and beautiful. That focuses primarily on the world and reality. The next 2 assumptions will now draw our attention to the child, to the student, the human being, and then to the relationship between the human being, the second assumption, to the relationship of the human being, the student, and the world, or the cosmos. And I'm very excited to be able to talk about all 3 as being in harmony with each other, because that's a significant point to make to our students, and one that really opens their eyes to a world where they find meaning, and they're able to experience joy even in the face of trials and challenges, even in the face of the lack of injustice that we see around us. It gives meaning to even our attempts to try to change the world and to make it into a better place. So once again, classical is one thing that I love to talk about, and I want to encourage our viewers and our parents to explore it by visiting our website and our Twitter accounts.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I thank you for the preview about parts,
Course.
the second and third assumptions. So I do have a couple more questions about the first assumption, that I wanted just to, let's give ourselves just a few more minutes to talk about
Sure.
that. So,
Sure. Of course.
and so I guess, like, so like in the sort of later part of the post, you talk about like, sort of the benefits and some of the risks. So like I guess the benefits of teaching, this based on this assumption, right, that the world is true, good, and beautiful. That equips students with a set of skills, and then there's also talk about the risk of like if those assumptions aren't built into the education, what are some of the risks? So yeah, can you address that? Like, what are the benefits that come from teaching based on
Mhm.
this, and what are some of the risks of
Mhm.
not knowing what the assumptions are?
Absolutely. So I think we're seeing in our young people today the risks. I mean, you just go on a TikTok account today, and you see how our young people are suffering. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for approval. They're looking to find something, purpose in life, and they're because they have grown up in a paradigm where the world has not been taught to them as being good, true, and beautiful, but as being sometimes um, explicitly bad and unfair and unjust to certain groups, right? I think our young people look at the world now and say, what is the purpose of anything? This is so absolutely absurd. I just don't find any meaning anymore in living. And that would be really the worst place to be. And we're seeing a lot of young people suffering in that regard. Now, classical education, we don't preach or moralize. And this is a very important point because we don't browbeat and tell children the world is true, good, and beautiful 24/7. What we do is we expose them to stories of great men and women. And one of our favorite stories is Rosa Parks, for example, the story of Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr., where we, without having to moralize or preach, it's a natural human tendency, especially in the young who love to listen to stories, for them to just feel inspired. And that inspiration, if you will, is what shapes the heart of the children to love the things that are true, good, and beautiful. And they aspire to become like them and become heroic. And that again gives meaning. When we look at the life of heroes and we do the opposite, which is we find all of their flaws and we break down or destroy, deconstruct all of their humanness, if you will. We really rob our children from the opportunity to first experiencing the greatness of what it is for a human to actually sacrifice themselves for others. It gives them a glimpse into what love could be and how great love, how far love could go in their own lives to making a difference for themselves and the community in which they live. So yes, that's again models that don't make that explicit to children and somehow expect them to find it on their own. Unfortunately, we'll discover that it's very unlikely, given the amount of distractions that our students have today, with the internet, with the games that they play. It's very unlikely that they're going to come to these conclusions on their own. Especially if they're hurting in their families, and we get I've worked in a lot of Title One communities. My heart is for our low-income families and providing a classical education to them. Uh, it is very, they're coming from a place of a lot of pain. So they need to see that in their teachers. They need to see that exemplified every day at school. And that's why school culture is so important. I'm so glad you brought that up. And that's why I think classical is also so important, because they finally get to experience something different and see that the heroes that we teach them also come from a place of a lot of pain and suffering. And yet there is meaning to their lives. And that meaning can be theirs as well. So I'm so glad you brought that up, Inga.
Yeah, yeah. Well, through the historical figures and the literary characters that students learn about in classical education, it's building up like a mental library for them of stories of people and fictional characters acting heroically, and it gives them it's sort of that's a body of knowledge and role models that they can draw on when they are facing their own challenges in life, and it gives life meaning instead of just thinking, well, what's the point, right? Like it's a lost cause. It's
Absolutely.
not a lost cause, right?
Yes, yes. One of the greatest things, and I've seen this a lot in our teenagers, because they're especially at an age where they think that they're alone. So this is a very common experience for all of us who've gone through our teenage years, and it's much more. I would say it's increased in our young today. They experience everything that happens to them as this only happens to me. Why is this happening to me? And then there is this. Strangely, there's this inability for them to be able to see how connected they are, and including that pain and suffering that they're having at that moment it's universal, so universal that in
Right.
fact they could find that they are part of a community as a result of it. In our classical schools and classical education, our students are so aware of that, and they can recall the suffering of Odysseus as he spent 20 years out in out in the ocean trying to get back home. The suffering of Telemachus, who didn't see his father for 20 years because he had gone off to war, and who knows where he was, whether he was alive or not. The suffering of Dido, the suffering of Aeneas, the suffering of. There's so many heroes that come from a place of suffering, and to be able to add those to your arsenal, right, of friends, and say, I belong to a community of thinkers, of heroes, of painters, of just humans who have suffered deeply. And what I'm going through is not new in that regard. So there is that beautiful community that we create, and it extends the walls of the school, and it extends time, and it goes all the way back to the beginning, and it just makes the discovery and search for these great questions much more exciting, because we realize we're all in it together, and we're all trying to figure out our way in the world and to find the answers that will ultimately make us happy. So yes, that's excellent.
Yeah. Well, um, these ideas are, like you mentioned, in over time, right? That there are, works that are over 2,000 years old, and yet, modern readers can really resonate with. I think
Absolutely.
these are examples that speak to us and feel so, so personal, right? It's like, are this person in my head? Like this is really how it feels, and how
Yeah.
positive for young people to experience that, and it's a lifelong journey. I mean, I'm still soaking this stuff in, and I have a 14-year-old, and I'm trying to help him understand these things and
Yes.
how to be a good person. And
Mhm.
and also these are, I mean, like, classical education is a universal human thing. Like, it's not just, people who have some cultural connection to ancient Greece or Rome or whatever,
That's
right?
right.
Well, my ancestors were the barbarians, right? They were the ones on the other side of the right.
Yeah.
My ancestors are the ones Marcus Aurelius was really angry at, right? But
Yeah.
we can all still benefit from it, right? There's hope even for
Yes,
Germans, right? So um
absolutely. That's right.
yeah, and and you talk about your your heart for the students who are in the under resourced communities, and they may be experiencing trauma, they may be you know have a sense that there are not opportunities for people who are growing up where they're growing up. But classical education can give them the mental toughness, like the ambition, the self regulation that can open doors for them, and it gives them a broader set of role models. Beyond just, maybe like an athlete or an entertainer,
Mhm.
but like, a different conception about what happiness is and what it means to be a good person.
Absolutely. The ultimate aim of the classical model is for children to achieve wisdom. So, especially at Heritage Classical Academy, we make that part of our motto, which is knowledge to a state of wisdom and character to a state of virtue. And how great would it be for our pop culture role models? How great would it be for our singers and our artists and our poets to be classically educated? Because in a way they would be modeling both how we can get the most out of this life and enjoy it through the art, and the things that we love to do, our hobbies, and at the same time be able to be deeply contemplative about what does it mean to live in the world, and you know just put a check on some of the things that we generally tweet without thinking twice, and then wondering why our culture is where it is right now. Words and examples have so much power, especially to our young, who are the most vulnerable when it comes to how our role models live, what kind of lifestyle they lead. And I think that a classical education could go a long way to helping and shaping our students in that direction where they can ask themselves, as we pointed out earlier, is this good or bad for me? Is this true or false? Is this something that just pleases me because it feels good to my body? Or is it also good and it pleases me both intellectually and morally? Is my will made freer as a result of this type of behavior or what I'm listening to or what I'm watching? So yeah, these are great things for our students to start to grow into and develop the habit of start thinking about. It's not part of the prevailing conversation today, and it's a lot of our educators and teachers are afraid to even push in that direction a little bit. So there's a lot of relativity happening in our classrooms, and this is why we see again a prevalence of ideas that shouldn't be. We shouldn't be seeing racism. I mean, our children should be taught to hate that, right? And we should be unapologetic about it, and schools should be as well. So I think a classical education will go a long way towards helping our students developing the right moral compass, if you will,
Yeah.
that would lead again our society to a much better place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's on that note, I want to reinforce like how people can keep in touch with your work at Heritage Classical. Also encourage people like please subscribe to SA Turner Moms, follow our page because Mr. Ortiz is going to be back next month and the month after. We've got more updates and more to share about classical education, additional assumptions that build a classical education environment. And also like things to look for in school culture. So I'm looking forward to sharing that information. But I guess but your main focus these days is getting approval for the charter for Heritage Classical Academy, which will be in Houston. And I'm hoping that families tuning into this will be intrigued, and they can go to the website heritageclassicalhouston.org. They can follow you on social media, join the interest list. So yes, what's your ask for families and community members who are excited about classical education?
Yes, absolutely. The classical education movement is growing. It's growing wildly. I've never seen it like this before. Parents are really tuning in. Political figures are tuning in. Professors are writing books about it. It's really making a huge comeback, and it's precisely because I think we're really intuiting that it is what exactly fits in the vacuum that we're experiencing in the educational crisis that we see today. So I want to encourage all of our families and parents to continue exploring it by following us again on all of our social media platforms. If you want to support us in other ways, there's other ways on the website in which you can support the project specifically in Houston. But we also have resources if you want to open your own classical school or you want to do classical school homeschooling and you're wondering what kind of curriculum, where to start, or you want to encourage your church leaders or priests to start a classical school at their churches or mosques or parishes, reach out to us because we have all of that for free. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can learn from us, from our trials and errors, and really kind of follow a template that we've created as a result of our own attempt to start a school. Inga, thank you so much. What you're doing is amazing. And I really admire you, and you've created an incredible community here in San Antonio. So thank you so much for thinking of us. And I look forward to our next time when we meet again to talk about classical.
I'm excited about it too. Thank you so much. Yes, families, please click through the description of the video. It takes you to Oscar's guest post. Lots of information there, lots of links. And best wishes on Heritage Classical Academy in Houston.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.